We're going to go now to Danielle Deiseroth, a longtime friend of this council, the executive director of polling from Data for Progress, and who started there in climate environmental polling before she became the director. I follow their polling. I've got that bookmarked on my desk. You should. It's about climate. It's about other progressive issues. It's about housing. It's about voting, about democracy, and so often addresses issues that are key to the electorate. So few people have done more to understand how our issue, climate and environmental justice, is a voting issue than Danielle. And every time she speaks, I learn something new. Welcome, Danielle. I will bring up the slides for you. We're all over the place. Sorry.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Michelle, and thank you so much for having me here today and to be among such incredible climate leaders. It's such an honor to be here. So, hi, my name is Danielle Deiseroth. I'm the executive director at Data for Progress, and I'm excited to share with you new research that we've conducted this summer on climate change and the 2024 election. So just to level set with everyone, according to the Yale Program on Climate Change Communications, the share of Americans who have grown alarmed or concerned about climate change over the past decade has risen sharply. And what we find in our research is that about 3/4 of voters are at least somewhat familiar with the topic of climate change, and just over half say the same about environmental justice. And voters are learning about these topics primarily from the news, but also from witnessing, seeing, or hearing about extreme weather events, from talking to people they know, and from seeing posts on social media. Looking back at 2020, climate change was a major issue, especially for voters who supported President Biden. Just over 2/3 of Biden voters, according to the Pew Research Center, said climate change was very important to their vote in 2020. And researchers from Tufts University found that climate change and the environment was one of the top issues for young voters in 2020. Now, in 2024, we find that almost 1/3 of voters say that climate change is more important to their vote this year than it was in 2020. And this is especially true for Democrats, young voters, and Latino voters. Just to really underscore this point, only 28% of all voters say that a candidate's stance on climate change is not at all important to their vote, compared to over half who say it is an important factor, and 14% of voters who say that climate change is a deal breaker on whether or not they will support a candidate. Now, what do voters know about Vice President Harris's plans to address climate change? Well, we find that almost half of voters have a positive view of Vice President Harris's plans, and that number skyrockets to almost 2/3 when we look at voters who say they've heard at least some about her plans. And this underscores the importance of communicating Vice President Harris's record to voters over these next few months. With our partners at Climate Power, we've found that Vice President Harris's record and actions on climate change throughout her career enjoy widespread bipartisan support. Voters are especially excited about Vice President Harris's longstanding efforts to curb air and water pollution and hold big polluters accountable. The record between Vice President Harris and Donald Trump on climate change could not be more different. And voters strongly agree with Harris's views about holding big polluters accountable, compared to few who agree with Donald Trump's statements about drill baby drill and denying climate change. Moreover, over half of voters agree with Vice President Harris's views that Donald Trump is in the pocket of big oil, whereas very few agree with Donald Trump's statements that the quote-unquote Green New Scam is costing Americans trillions of wasted dollars. Looking forward, over 60% of voters want Vice President Harris to continue cementing the legacy that she and President Biden have established of tackling the climate crisis head on. And finally, just to do a quick comparison back to 2020, we asked voters the same questions as we did 4 years ago. And what we found is that public opinion is remarkably stable. Just as they did in 2020, over half of voters say that they are more likely to support a presidential candidate who wants to make historic investments in 21st century sustainable infrastructure projects, create millions of new union jobs to create clean energy projects, and create an environmental justice fund to invest in the communities that have disproportionately borne the brunt of climate change and pollution. If you take anything away from this presentation as we enter these final critical few months, know that climate change remains a very important factor for voters this year. In fact, it's more important to quite a few. And the record of Vice President Harris's actions on climate change and clean energy serve a stark contrast to those of Donald Trump. And communicating Vice President Harris's record on climate change to voters, which is widely supported across party lines, is key. Thank you so much for having me.